what would be the non-parametric equivalent of a one-way ANOVA? So the non-parametric version of the test we just did with these three levels. For that, we'll use a test called the Kruskal-Wallis test. We'll load it from the coin library. And in much the same way, we specify our model here with our data table, and you can't do an exact test, it turns out, with Kruskal-Wallis if you have three levels. So we make explicit asymptotic here. Okay, so when we run the test, we see the overall test, comparing all of this at once, is a p-value of 0.002. So we have significance there. Notice if we do it on log time, we get the same result because it's a rank-based test, as we explained previously. These are reported as chi-squared tests. You can get the n, which goes into how you report a chi-squared, if you recall from our discussion previously, with the n-row command. So we're entitled to follow up with post hoc pairwise comparisons, and we can, like we've seen before, use a Mann-Whitney U-test. And so for that, we do our tests here, and we encode them in results: Visual Studio versus Eclipse, Visual Studio versus PyCharm, and Eclipse versus PyCharm, and then we adjust them for multiple comparisons. So I'll run all of that together, and we can see the three values put out here at the bottom correspond to the order that those tests are listed in the p-adjust line above. So we have significant difference for Visual Studio versus Eclipse, as we'd expect, and I'll jump to the third one for Eclipse versus PyCharm there. But as we saw with the parametric test, no significant difference between Visual Studio and PyCharm. And so our conclusion with the non-parametric test is the same. For completeness, I include another way of doing non-parametric pairwise comparisons from the PMCMR library. You can look into that if you want more background. It produces a small, oops, I have to load the library first. There we go. It produces a small table of results where you can compare rows and columns. And the conclusions there are the same as we've seen. So here we can see the analyses that we've just completed in red. We had one factor, IDE. It had more than two levels. It had three levels, in fact. And it was a between-subject study. Each subject only encountered one of the different programming tools. The parametric test was a one-way ANOVA, and the non-parametric test that was the equivalent was the Kruskal-Wallis test. We also saw for both of these tests post hoc comparison tests that were follow-ups when the overall test was significant. For the one-way ANOVA, those follow-up post hoc tests were a series of independent samples t-tests, and for the Kruskal-Wallis test, it was a series of Mann-Whitney U-tests. Now let's move further into the table and look at within subjects designs for one factor.